for me anyway, the implementation of those urban planning policies, because the urban planning and urban design are very connected. And this afternoon, we will talk about how urban design and architecture are connected. Let me just bring up the course outline. This is new. I don't think I posted this like I think a day ago. But for those who are not here or haven't read this, I'll just read this out loud. So this first week, that's February 1 to February 5, we'll be talking about an overview of design. That's this lecture. And then after that, we'll look at sustainability and have a pre-mid assignment, which we'll discuss at the end of this lecture, elements of urban design, reconciling urban design and architecture. Actually, that's also very connected to this book. So probably we can use this book for the entire February. And then we'll be looking at urban design and local governance, local ordinances and laws. Basically, this is the policy and political side of urban design, as well as architecture. And then our midterm exam will be on week 7. That's week 7, that's March, you can see it, 15 to 20. So ours will probably be on 19, because we are a MW class. 15 to 20, yes. 19 is a Friday. Infrastructure and utilities will be next for week 8 and 9. And then we'll touch a bit on the economic side, as we did with planning, but this time like on the street level, on the micro level. How are cities made, job creation, and urban sustainability. And then pre-final report will be connecting governance, infrastructure, and economics for your design plate too. No spoilers for the second plate after the church, but it will be a lot more comprehensive, a lot more research heavy. And then you can use that research in your report here. And then we'll be coordinating with Architect Malaya's class, the research class. So basically making a more robust, more detailed proposal. And this will prepare you for your thesis in 5th year, and also just more practice in your 4th year. So at the end of this course, the 5-year course, you'll definitely be a lot better than I was during my time, and I completed the course back in 2013. And then after looking at economics and preparing our pre-final report, we'll look at the social factors, heritage and culture, importance of public space and placemaking. And then by May, the last topic we'll cover probably disaster risk management, which is something that's really coming up more often in the world. We had the tsunami like a couple years back, not really a couple years back, like 2014, 2013-ish. That's like 7 years ago. And then right now we have the pandemic. And then one idea a friend of mine had about the church is you could also, it's a memorial church, but maybe you can also add like an additional use, like a evacuation facility. The church can also double as an evacuation facility, something like that. So your building is not just one use, but mixed use, which is also like a big factor for like urban design. And then our final presentation, I don't think we'll be having a quiz for this subject, just like submitting a report similar to what we did last time, but this time it'll be more detailed and less of an reflection type, but more of a study and scientific type, objective type of a report. So it'll be looking at governance, infrastructure, economic factors, as well as social and disaster risk management for your plate number 2. So this way, your plate number 2 will have proper research, thesis level research, will have proper, what do you call this, analysis of urban impacts, not just within your site, but like across the city, like a city level impact for your plate number 2. And this way, the goal is like in the future, all buildings will be interconnected. We'll have studies and analyses, not just looking at the one lot, but like how this one building, especially since plate number 2 will be a little big, it's actually a series of buildings, how these buildings will impact society as a whole, society and the city as a whole. Okay, so next, let's see how many people we are. We are 9 still. Oh well. I guess 2 p.m. is really the yeah, I'm feeling it too. The sleepy time. So instead of PowerPoints, I'll be like focusing more on write-ups, really just to force you guys to force you guys to read, and then I'll explain the articles, but also give you some books like what I did. I already have some books here, and where did I put that? Did I put that here? Oh, there it is, the reference book. And then I'll have some quizzes where the questions will force you to open up the book and like even if you're just copying from the book, at least you're reading the book. Okay, so urban design. So for this class, I would design urban design. I would define urban design as the implementation of planning policies at the street level. And remember this image from last sem, the space between buildings. That's basically where urban design is. Moten, our reference book, has a more specific definition. He says, or he writes, urban design is the study of the private domain, the streets, boulevards, squares, and public parks, together with the building facades that define them. So looking at the public space. So over here, just a brief history and theory of urban design. Slightly different from urban planning, but if you remember the urban planning history course lecture, you'll be fine. For those who weren't under me, this will be a fun experience. So urban design and architecture are very much linked because as I explained here, they both have their origins in like city making when humans started settling. That's a shift from hunter gatherer to like a farmer settler type of situation. And the earliest cities could be, or like towns, there weren't cities back then, could be seen around 7000 BCE. So you can look up Catalhuyuk. This is your archist, and the Neolithic Revolution. And then the first written document about urban design or like town planning could be seen in the architecture book by Vitruvius, the De Architectura, or the 10 books of architecture. And then this connection further continues like from ancient times, medieval times, all the way through the Renaissance. There weren't much books during the medieval period, but that was because nobody was writing. But when the printing press was created in the 1400s, we get the sort of the continuation of architectural and urban documents. We have De Re a Defectoria by Leon Battista Alberti, the person who designed Palazzo Rucellai. We can look that up very quickly. Rucellai, there we go. So if you remember your archist, it's this one. It's the palace with the more treated facade, not so rough ground floor, but you still have the Doric, Corinthian, and the Ionic columns on top. So this is the Palazzo Rucellai. So the same person who designed this building wrote this book. Oops, where is it? De Re a Defectoria. So he describes like what was the Renaissance ideal, and this ideal was also echoed by Filarate. Basically, his name. This is a like a nickname. Filarate literally translates to lover of excellence, and he did a sort of a sketch or design for his ideal city in Sroszinda in Italy. His book was called Libro Architettonico. So there is this connection, like all the way from ancient times up to the Renaissance between urban design and architecture. That is why you're studying it today. Also, take note of the form of the plan for Srofzinda. Srofzinda. Yeah, that's how you pronounce it, I think. It's a centralized city. This could be a church or a plaza, definitely a plaza with a church. And then it's walled, basically because during this time, during the Renaissance time, the Italian cities and other colonies of like, not really colonies, they weren't colonies yet, other cities related to Rome fell during the barbaric and also Muslim invasion. So all the cities would have had walls. And the reason for the shape of these walls, these angles here, because around the same time, let's say like 1500s, they invented the cannon. So you don't have the medieval wall, which is just like a tall, uh, thin walls. Now you have these angled. Let me actually draw this for you guys, so it's more entertaining than just me talking about the picture. So these walls, the reason they're angles, they have a functional value. So I'm taking a screenshot of that. Actually, I have the image over here. Let me just open it up for you. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation. I can talk about this for probably 2 hours, but I won't use up the 2 hours. I'll try to be brief. But I'll just want to highlight how these walls of like Renaissance ideal cities were functional. So the idea behind this sort of design is is it desaturated? Oh no, it's desaturated. Oh well, let's work with that. The idea of enfilading or flanking fire, let's just say flanking fire. The term is like enfilading or enfilading, I'm not sure. But around this time, the cannon would have been invented. So the idea here is you have a cannon here. You have a cannon here and you have a cannon here. And then to protect the city, like any invading force would have to scale the walls. So in the event that the invading force actually got past these cannons, they would have to first climb this wall and then climb this wall. And while they're climbing, they're very much vulnerable to fire. So that's why, hence this angle here. So the defenders could just turn the cannons onto here, or like whatever guns they had, or maybe even some combination of bows and arrows. And this area here would be a very well protected or flanked by the two cannons. So anyone trying to reach the second wall would probably be shot full of holes before they can even finish climbing the wall. So that's the purpose of this almost star-shaped defense, like wall defense. Basically, the idea is they can turn the cannons or whatever weapons they had into the walls and then just like straight up stop people from climbing the walls. So that's basically it. That was there was a presentation on that on the Intramuros Facebook page, very well presented by I think a Spanish immigrant, Spanish professor, very well versed in the history of that. And then, okay, it's 2:23. I'll just like quickly browse through it because you guys will be reading this anyway. And then expect a quiz next week, like on Monday, just 5 items on this and like the discussion. Okay, and then Renaissance, blah, blah, blah. We had Andrea Palladio's Il Quattro Libre, or 4 Books of Architecture, published in the 1570s, notable for highlighting case studies. And then I'll show you some pictures of that in the next, like a next module or something, but you can Google it. I just wanted you to know the name of the book, because I think this is available online. I'll give you a copy once I get one. And then the Laws of the Indies, which we discussed in urban planning, was also written or compiled around this time. So between 1600s and the 1800s. And this is an illustration of a plaza in Manila. I forgot to write the I. So this is already looking like present-day Manila or present-day Cebu. Very Renaissance inspired. You can see the paired columns, not paired columns, paired meaning 2 columns. And then the almost the Baroque or like late Renaissance, like volutes, or like this curving here. And then the bell tower of the church. So every plaza would like be surrounded by public buildings, like whether it be like a government office or a church, etc. And then this idea of like symmetry, the Renaissance principles, kind of stayed around until the 1800s, when Camillo Sight, or Camillo Seat, I don't know how to pronounce that, a Viennese architect. Remember in our urban planning class, currently number one most livable city is Vienna, so it would be a good idea to take advice from a Viennese architect. So his book, City Planning According to Artistic Principles, challenged this idea of that cities should be, or like plazas and a public space should be symmetrical because symmetry is beauty. He said that you can have cities should do an incremental approach based on like interviewing what the people really need or what the people living in the city really need, and also talked about the importance of irregularity in urban form. So we don't have to confine city making or public space making into this strict, rigid, symmetrical form. But he also, like Motin would also say that Site was not completely against symmetry. He's just like more about creating a more realistic approach to developing cities. Because cities during this time were like getting bigger. Public health was getting better. People lived longer, and then as we talked about in urban planning, cities like from ancient Roman times up until the Industrial Revolution were rapidly getting more and more populated. And this came with several problems like health concerns and overpopulation within the city and just like being crowded. So there was really this call or this need for a different way of city planning. In his book, City Planning According to Artistic Principles, Camille Side did several sketches. These are called figure ground sketches. Basically, these sketches help early planners, early designers, urban planners and designers think about the relationship between the built form of the city and the paths. So the shaded areas are built form and the paths are left white. So this helped them analyze how do people move around in the city. And remember, during this time, people moved around by walking or by horse carriage. And then I also like here noted that Garden City movement also came out like not really close, but 100 years later, 1902, even at the earliest 1898, talking about the need for better city planning. This is Ebenezer Howard, I think, was like London based, but he moved to America. So this is like the ideas of Europe slowly reaching America. I think by this time, the Philippines was still a Spanish colony up until 1898 or 1899, something like that. Anyway, by the 1900s, we would have been a American colony, so that's significant. So even during this time, when Camilo Site was publishing his book, planners like Daniel Burnham, the person who planned Manila and a bit of Cebu, although it wasn't what you call this followed, there was still this idea that they needed to create better cities. And although Cebu and Manila didn't really need those principles yet because we weren't as populated or as crowded as the European and American cities, it's good that at least for Manila, those foundations were built into the design. And then another thing that happened in the 1900s, of course, was the invention of the private automobile or the car. And then its effects we can feel them today. Like the traffic is like almost impossible in Cebu City, and even worse in Manila. And then how the car became so popular could be attributed to the modernist movement. People like Le Corbusier really loved mechanical or the vehicles. Several documents, like a few documentaries I watched, like describes how Le Corbusier was infatuated with airplanes and machinery. And even you could read or hear Le Corbusier talk about how the home is a machine for living. So he had this idea of like machine and like efficiency, really liked it. And then that's how he saw the car. And then he told all his friends that this is the future. Let's make more highways because the car is going to be very popular. And then writers like Siegfried Gideon, who wrote Space, Time, and Architecture, also believed the same thing, wrote this book about it. The book became popular, so much so that even Winan Klassen the writer of our History of Western Architecture also referenced Gideon in his book. So that's the early 1900s. By the second half of the 1900s, 1950s, 1960s, there would be a counter movement to those people who, or designers who really love highways, who want more highways, want more access for private vehicles, forgetting the pedestrians. We have people like Kevin Lynch and Jane Jacobs who really try to study the fabric or the composition of a city. Kevin Lynch divided his elements of the city into five. You have the path, edge, district, node, and landmark, basically talking about this concept of imageability, something like that. So he argues that if we just continue building more highways, we lose this imageability or this value within cities that, let's say, urban structure should present a strong visual image. Because if your city is all just highways and then no sidewalks, no public space, you'll have what we have in Cebu. Just a city full of roads and like a origin point and a destination point and nothing in between. And it creates this like very stressful, and for those who are living in Cebu, it's very, it's very heavy. It's not like, although it varies from person to person, but it definitely, Cebu City and Manila could definitely be better. So for those of you who are lucky enough to do some traveling, you can really feel it when you go like abroad, especially in the livable cities like in Europe. And then apparently Australia is getting on that list. Japan is also like in the top 5. America, not so much, because they're more of the highways type of development. Like, imagine when was the last time you stopped, like while you're walking down the street, stopped and like took a picture of the buildings around you? That's the kind of cities that Kevin Lynch and Jane Jacobs want to build. And then Motin would argue, and also Site would argue, that the last 100 years, the last 200 years, no good, what do you call this? There haven't been much, or it's not as advertised, like good urban design projects have been done. That's why there's a need to like reevaluate how we do our designing, our city building, so that we can create something at least similar, or but not fully copying what happened in the Renaissance. So we're looking for like, what is the future of city planning and city designing and like city construction? And then let me just talk quickly about Jane Jacobs and her book, Death and Life of Great American Cities. So she called for or she challenged the modernist or rationalist movement, that they even said that the rationalist movement tended to oversimplify city building. And then she called for like the designers to just really reevaluate how they design cities, the urban designers, I mean. And then she also advocated for mixed use, mixed use development, which is now the goal of contemporary urban designers. So what does mixed use development look like? So over here, you have like an image of, I'll just open this in Photoshop for you guys, of what a mixed use development or like a square might look like. Let me open up. Here we go. And let me close this old one so my computer doesn't freeze. So what are the components here? You have commercial uses, you have public uses, a few private uses, and then just really a space or a small part of a city that's like allows freedom of movement, accessibility, not just for the car, but for people, and a place where people can gather and sort of just like enjoy life or enjoy the city. Because right now, I think even before the pandemic, I think the only gathering places in Cebu are the malls. It seems like Cebu City or Cebuanos have really no other option between the malls and the beaches and nothing in between. That's why like our city centers, in between the destinations and the home, like whether the destination is school or work, are really being like forgotten or like getting dirty or like set aside, because like nobody uses it. That's why our streets. That's why we don't have sidewalks because nobody uses it. We have the jeeps, and then very few people walk to get from one destination to another. Not so much because they don't choose to walk, but more on they don't have the option to walk. They're not being provided the option to walk, and this option is really what contemporary urban designers are trying to champion or give back to the people, because the 1950s and 1960s were just overpowered by the love and the need for the car. So just highlighting some different uses here. You got like nightclubs, gallery events, private spaces basically. So this is a private space, private space. Basically everything in purple is a private space. You have so clubhouse, cafe, eateries, restaurants, and then you see highlighted in red dash lines here would be like the main axis of this design. And then you can have people seeing each other, just like this is what makes a city good. And for those who haven't visited cities abroad, like we could probably do like a walkthrough of my experience in Sydney. Like one of the streets I always use to go to school and for like to go watch movies or hang out with friends for entertainment, just to show you the difference of like what it's like to be it's not really the best, but a better city than Cebu. And then that's why I feel like I enjoy teaching, because there's no way something like this could be built in Cebu in my lifetime. Although we already have something like this, like maybe in the Ayala malls, Ayala Business Park, and IT Park. But it's really you guys who will be young enough after you graduate and have the energy to really push through plans like this. Okay, that's 2:30. We'll move on to the book, the parts that I couldn't put into this short article. How many people are we in so far? We are at 13 people. Okay, feel free to send in questions. I'll just keep recording. This is already like 30 minutes long. Where is my book? Okay, here's the book. Do I need this? I'll probably keep that. Okay. So that whole discussion about the history of urban design is really laid out here in the introduction of Urban Design, Street and Square by Moten. And I would highly encourage you guys to check that out. And more than likely, if anything else, I'll take a bunch of questions from the introduction and the first 3 chapters. So chapter 1, Urban Design and People, is basically what it says, Urban Design and People. And it shows here, the most important thing here is this figure 1.6, which shows you a sort of table showing the levels or the scales of participation. So you have in row 1 or column 1, the techniques of participation, and then the levels of participation, the political system, spatial units, and then the modes of planning. So the best type of participation would be somewhere here, or like I think this is the one that highlighted should be the best, like political manifesto, public meeting, public inquiries, public appeals, and exhibition of the project, and press release. So that's a technique of participation. And then the level of participation would be, this is the highest level over here, citizen control, delegated power, and partnership. This is the degrees of citizen power, which usually, even in places like Australia, doesn't happen. But more often than not, unfortunately, what happens here in the urban design process is what they call placation, or just like, simply put, like tokenism. Like they're just doing it for requirements, or just because it's in the law, but the citizens or the people within the barangay or the town or the suburb were consulted, but not like they were given out forms that they're not really listening to them. The developers aren't really listening to them. You have like representative democracy, which is really where most of the world is. Like I think about 60%, maybe 70% of the world has a democracy type of government. And then the spatial units, Currently, most of probably the biggest urban design projects will be at the town or city level, district quarters sometimes, like in the more development countries like the US, Australia, and Europe. And then also included on this row is the spatial units of the home, street, and the neighborhood. So that's really more architectural. And I think this would also fit into your like a thesis level type of work, the neighborhood scale. And then finally, the mode of planning. You have mixed planning, structure planning. A lesser level would be action plan and the incremental planning. And then the highest level of planning would be the master planning. So really a detailed set of drawings to describe like what the development of one area should be. Okay, so that's basically it for chapter 1. Oh, before I skip onto the next page, you have the urban design process. So 4 phases, similar to our urban planning process. Moten would describe it as a simulation, general study, development, and communication. So a simulation is basically data gathering. General study is the investigation of the nature of the problem. So this is basically step 2 of our urban planning process, identifying the problems of the site. Development here is the development of one or more solutions, basically our implementing or like creating small solutions and experiments on the site. And then his last phase is communication, the communication of the chosen solutions to the client. So that back and forth. Similar to our evaluation and monitoring for urban planning. So something you might use, like there's this thing called a theoretical framework for thesis writing as well as research. Moten has a very interesting diagram here, dividing the theory or the design process into what do you call 4 quadrants. You have the inductive, deductive, and then, no, sorry, three quadrants. I don't know if the empirical is supposed to be here. I think one is supposed to be here on the lower left side. So inductive, deductive, theorizing, and empirical. Empirical is the more like measurable, meaning to measure. That's why you have like the imperial units or something like that. So you can start out at the top, you can start out at the bottom, or you could come in from the side. So there's several different angles you could solve a problem from. And this also creates like a very realistic depiction of the design process, because there's really several ways that you can think about your design. And I'll try to link this to your church design before the end of this lecture. So just going on, just like further discussing this diagram. So if you start here at the top, you look at the problem, look at the theories to solve that problem, and then you go to logical deduction, you get your ideas. Then from those ideas, you look at standards, you investigate if those standards are accurate or like applicable. You create the program, the objectives for your design. You develop that design, so that's program is schematic, and then preliminary, and then final, so that's your solution. And then because of time constraints in design class, we create the design process is very linear, but in actual process, because sometimes design projects, architectural and city scale or urban design projects don't get finished in 2 months. Sometimes they take over several years. So this continuing loop of like, this solution follow the theories? If not, let's redo our logical deduction. Let's make an evaluation, make a decision, logical inference, and then theories again, and then go back. And so just continually going through the loop, as many loops as possible to create a good design. So this is a very helpful scheme or diagram for the design process, and which you can probably also use for your thesis. Next, chapter 2, basic design concepts. So this is similar to architectural design elements or like goals or concepts as well. You have order, we're familiar with order, how you arrange the spaces or the buildings. But in this case, since it's like urban design level, you're arranging space. Street level, like where would the paths be, the edges be, and you have here images. These are very classical, neoclassical looking buildings. How is it like perceived at the street level? We're not looking at the inside of the building, but like just walking around these buildings, what is the effect? And then Motin, as well as several architectural books, would say order, or like some arrangement that like gives the sense of order is preferred over like chaos. And usually this can be found in like Renaissance examples. So order usually represented by symmetry. It gives the appearance of nothing was accidental. And then of course, proportion, how big one element is in relation to another element, size and scale, that's pretty much it. And now combination of both scale and proportion. So let me just quickly read here. At the most basic level, the proportions of a room or public square mean the relation of the height to the width to the length. So just the overall dimension and how it looks. So this is very basic stuff. I don't think we need to discuss that for this. Let me just breeze through it. But if you have like some questions on that, you could probably like read through this part. There's this interesting part here about harmony and proportion, where there's two schools of thought, or two ways to think about harmony and proportion, which I haven't really thought about until I read this part. There's number one, the classical school, or the Roman or Greek approaches, symmetry and all that. And then the second is the Middle Ages. I haven't really thought about the Middle Ages aside from the Gothic cathedrals, but if you look at this, I'm pretty sure this is Notre Dame de Paris. The three portals over here are really what stands out. And then just like a feature that Notre Dame de Paris has over, like, that makes it different from all the other Gothic churches, it doesn't have this weird angular portal here on the left, because like everything is symmetrical except this one part here. And I don't know why that is. Something to ask like Sir Kabilo. So the main question here for, or the main issue for harmony and proportion, do you go for a symmetrical design or do you go for an asymmetrical design? And then you see here, Le Corbusier's modular, you see the golden ratio. So several discussions on that, which might be interesting for a thesis later on. I don't think there has been much reports on like what else can we do with ratio and like proportion, and how do we use it to create better buildings, or is it outdated? That would be an interesting thesis topic. So I'm like giving you thesis ideas. This can also be applied to your church layouts, but we'll go into that probably like in chapter 3, which will be in a few minutes. So symmetry, balance, and rhythm. The example here is Christopher Wren's Greenwich Hospital in London. And then this diagram here talks about how Christopher Wren, also the designer of St. Paul's Cathedral, approached his project. So he has like 2 buildings, or like a whole complex, and he basically starts out with the Roman temple, 2 Roman temples, move the center of those 2 Roman temples to one side of each, and have like a unifying element. The main building would be around here in the center. So compare that to 1 temple with a smaller scale to like two temples with a larger scale. So this is like pretty straightforward. Just looking at it, it's symmetrical. You understand where is the main space. So let's look at that in 3D, so you have a better idea. Oh wait, that's wrong. Okay, over here. So this is Greenwich Hospital. The main building that we were looking at in the picture is over here, the Queen's House, temporarily closed because of COVID. So the whole structure, let me just, okay, it's not letting me get a good halfway point. I'll take a screenshot of that. So the whole complex is here. And the main element, the main organizing element is the axis. And on that axis, they just mirror or repeat what's on one side to achieve that symmetry. So we'll look at some images over here so we can appreciate the architecture more, because we just had the sketches. Here we go. So take a look at that. Open image in new tab. So you see this like, I think this is from one view. It doesn't look exactly like the sketch, and this might have like undergone renovations. So you can see the very neoclassical look. paired columns, entablature, pediment, domes, and then several cornices or horizontal elements. So to create this harmonious design. So symmetry is really still is considered like the old school way of designing, but I think it still has like its appeal. So you could modernize this in your church and have like a symmetrical layout, and then yeah, that's like one option. The next option over here, let's look for the asymmetrical examples. So you have a like a Piazza del Campo in Siena. So already you have this like irregular shape, and it's also part of rhythm, harmony, and contrast. And then it looks messy, but if you go through the street level and stay in this plaza, there's still that sense of like of beauty or aesthetic quality to it. Not much examples. Not much examples of asymmetrical layouts, but I guess we have some images here. You have the Church of here you go 4.2. The Church and Convent of San Francisco in Assisi. You have the bell tower here, creating that asymmetrical effect, and then the Piazza del Campo in Siena. So this is a street, like a lower level view of that previous image we looked at. So there's still that sense of order, even though it's not a symmetrical composition, and it's still like I don't know about you guys, but for me it still looks aesthetically pleasing. So we'll just quickly Google that at Campo Piazza, so we can see in HD what it looks like. What's it called? Fishbrain. Piazza del Campo. Piazza del Campo. Now try to imagine if there's like any place similar in Cebu City. I think the only place similar to this level of like open space and like a gathering space would probably be Ayala Mall. Do you think something like this in Cebu City would be nice? I think that most of you would say yes, but where would we build something like this? That's the main question. Like it has to be somewhere within the city or near any of the Ayala complex. Hopefully, Ayala would make something like this, but it's going to cost them a lot of money because just an open park like this doesn't really generate anywhere near the income of a new mall or a new residential building, like apartment building. So that's one of the challenges why we can't really, it's hard to create new public spaces in Cebu and globally in general. Even places like Australia and Europe still have still have trouble creating new public spaces because there's just no monetary benefit. There's no economic benefit, at least in the short term. But in the long term, the social, cultural, and even to some extent economic as well will benefit from well-designed plazas and public space. So over here, I have like a few highlights. We're already in chapter 3. So this is just me summarizing what's in the book. Buildings and landscape. So this is really getting close to your church design. So buildings of great individuality, when placed close together, are almost certain to conflict. So you just imagine a Frank Gehry building next to a normal building. So there's this conflict. The Frank Gehry building will always stand out. Now imagine if they have if you have two very, what do you call this? What Motin expresses as two very dynamic buildings or like individualistic. So if you imagine like a street over here, what would be a good color? Let's just keep it simple with black. So yeah, street over here with a sidewalk, and let's say you have like a Gehry building over here. And then you have a Zaha Hadid building over here. Like I don't know. I'm just creating something like that, and then their entrances would be there, and then you have Gary's and crazy entrances over here, and it doesn't look ordered. There's no sense of balance, and it would like create visual chaos. Versus two buildings that are like more or less plain. What Klassen would say architecture of work. So our simple like maybe two-story like apartment building or something like that. And it doesn't have to be classical. And it just has to not stand out as much or like blend in with its surroundings. And then I think this kind of street development or what do you call this, edge or like just say development in a city is a lot more pleasing than having something like this. A big sculptural building needs a big site so that it doesn't compete with the visual quality of the street. This also harkens back to Kevin Lynch's like imageability. And then a street that's well ordered and or aesthetically pleasing is more memorable and more valuable to those who are using those streets. Not that anyone in Cebu City walks as much, because we're all dependent on the car. But you could create something like this. Is this a car or a Jeep? You create something like this for your church. We'll get to that, I promise. And let me just get through this book. It's very interesting, and I think it will be very useful for you. Okay, moving on. We'll have like some good examples here. In fact, I already highlighted it. One example of an informal sculptural building. Oh wait, before that. Moten like describes, whoa. Okay. Moten describes that there are two basic forms taken by buildings, what I mentioned earlier. There is the informal model composed of like sculptural forms, like a building that's meant to be viewed from all sides, and the formal classical model. So that's informal and formal. Very easy to remember. This is formal, and this is informal. And we'll be looking at Le Corbus's Ronchamp, Notre Dame des Hauts. Basically, a chapel at Ronchamp is the other name. Whoop. So we need like a better image of this. But this is the floor plan of Ronchamp. This is there's an artificial slope here, unbuilt apparently. And then he meant this building to be viewed from several sides, like basically all around. So Le Corbusier creates on an artificial slope to contain the pilgrim's zone. Concave surfaces draw towards the chapel. So if you remember, usually I just call it the Ronchamp Chapel. Chapel at Ronchamp. Close. So it's this church. It kind of looks like an upside down boat. If you go to Google Maps, it's really on its own lot, not burdened by other buildings around it. So let me just zoom in here. And your site is kind of similar if it wasn't for the mall just across the street. So how do you create a good composition in spite of the mall? And then this is a really challenge because this is a memorial church that you're designing for your design class. And then it's the goal here is to create something that has a spiritual meaning and not just like functional, what do you call this? Functional value, like the hospital we did. Oh, there's no 3D. But as you can see here, there's very small, there's a few buildings around it, but I think the tallest building or like the building that stands out the most is really Notre Dame des Hauts or the Ronchamp. So going back here, oops, that's not the one. So you can see it's very weird shape, and then a section showing how I think the light enters the building. The chapels at periscopes, which establish contact with distant horizons. I think this reflects. Yes, I really think it does. reflects into the interior. So let's just look at Ronchamp interior. Periscopes. We have a really nice section over here. I'll open that up. So you can really play around with light. And in fact, I should encourage you guys to play around with light, the openings inside your church. And then so that you don't just create some other same old building, but really have some innovation in your design. And then given that the church is the best project for this kind of like sculptural playfulness, because you're not bogged down by so much functional requirements. You're really trying to elevate the space into something that's standard, to something like spiritual and valuable. I think that's what your teachers will be looking for. And as well as in my class, that's what I'll be looking for. So let me just make that bigger. So you can see how the treatment of the wall creates this very dynamic lighting effect, even though it's just a normal day outside. But when you go inside the church, into the church, you're almost as if transported into this like higher, like spiritual plane. So that's that about informal composition for buildings. And then on the flip side, the formal would be the classic Renaissance churches, maybe even some of the Gothic, but formal buildings or formal building types would be more symmetrical, more rigid compared to the informal. So that's basically the difference there. And then Moten also highlights buildings of simple geometric shape and trying to elevate them to some importance, because as architects we're always told, like I just mentioned earlier, that we're looking for innovation, but sometimes innovation is in conflict with the program or the objective of the building. Sometimes you need buildings that blend in. So there's really this dynamic push and pull between creating sculptural pieces of architecture or more functional, more subdued architectural buildings. So the example here for less dramatic, less dynamic buildings is the Piazza del Duomo in Pisa. The most famous building here is the Campanile. It's the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And then you have the cathedral, you have the Campo Santo or the cemetery, and the baptistry. And it's on a irregular looking site. But you can see the main axis created by the church and the baptistry. And then even though the campanile or the bell tower is off here to the side, it sort of still relates to these three buildings and the Campo Santo, which is tucked away here in this corner. And this is an image of that, the baptistry, the church, and the leaning tower or the bell tower. And I think it will serve us well to look at a colored image, right, which I prepared over here. So not one building stands out from the other. In fact, they're very box-like or simple. And because they are simple, they easily sort of relate to each other, except for the leaning tower. it's leaning. And but you can see the language. If Moten likes to compare architecture to language, I think also several authors do this. Think of it as like a paragraph, and if you have one sentence or like a sentence that stands out too different from the whole paragraph, it kind of ruins the message. Where here, the message of the paragraph is very clear, very ordered, and you know exactly what it's trying to say. Symmetry is beauty. Symmetry is like related to religion, something like that. So this kind of visual composition is not just good, but kind of like elevates the meaning or the aesthetic value of the site, meaning and the aesthetic value of the site. Okay, oh, yeah, it's 3:04. So we've been going at this for almost an hour now. I don't want to make the video so long because like people won't watch it, and that's the opposite of what they want to happen. So that's basically it. Just a quick note here on spatial unity and the use of the right angle, how you can arrange buildings according to a right angle. I think for your church, more or less you'll have one building, but there are several other elements in your church. So if I go back here. Let me turn that off and make a new layer. Let's go switch to black, cancel, black. And let me make that the center. So your site is kind of like this. You have your street here, and then you have SM in front of your lot, and then you have the 30-meter road here, and then 20-meter road here. So earlier today, I shared to our Facebook group that you can have several options with this site. Number one, you could have your building rectangular like this, or you can have your building oriented like this. And we talked about how this option has better wind access. Because, oh wait, not wind access, sorry. This option has better solar access because this is the east, the east, it's west. So sun rises here, sets in the west, and yeah, just imagine like this is your altar. Control the E, XB. So imagine like this is your altar, and then just cut a section through here, and then you can have an altar that looks like this, and you have several windows. It doesn't have to be the rose window, or like it could be modern, like just like rectangular windows with your altar here, and you can use or take advantage of your site to let the morning light shine in. And you can do something similar to Rotchamp, where you have like sort of like chamfered or like filleted edges to even increase the dramatic effect. So you can have what they call this, the site, your building is elevating the spirituality or the value of the interior. And then when the sun sets, you can have like more glass windows over here, so that like during the afternoon or the early evening, the light will come pouring in from the entrance. Like this is the entrance. Your pilgrimage people, the visitors, will be illuminated by the afternoon sun over here. So that's something you can do. Or with this layout, when I mentioned that it has great, what they call this, ventilation, you can change the shape of your church, like the entrances. Excuse me. You can have the altar here or the altar here. One argument for having the altar on this end, because this is the sea, you can play around with the windows here so they can have views to the sea, and you can play around with the openings to have like some kind of, let me just draw that in 3D, some kind like of fins. This could be a very modern interpretation of the gateways, the Gothic gateways. And then you can have like a door here, and you can have like some glass over there. But the fins would be very good at catching natural ventilation. So your building's ventilated from here into here to here. So you might also reduce the need for air conditioning in your building. So already, I think I'm leaning towards this orientation, because you also have the views to the sea, and then you also have ventilation here. Sun is pretty, the sun option is looking pretty weak compared to this, because this has two benefits where the sun is just one benefit. The next item that you could think about is your parking. It's not really a building, but more like a space, and this like falls into our like talk on urban design and scale and arrangement and proportion. You wouldn't want to put your parking here. If your entrance is here, like you want to park there, you don't want to do this, because instead of making your church the star, it seems like it's now weakened because it has this like several parking spaces over here. So if you do like a 3D of that, what the pedestrians, there are no pedestrians, but what the car goers will see, the visitors will see on their cars, is a sea. They will see a sea, like several cars parked in front of your well-designed building over here. So it doesn't look like a church, but more like a car shop now. So you don't want that. So you really want to have your church front and center, and you can fix that by having a plaza or a square, public square, And then you can have, instead of your parking over here, you could do something like this. Have your parking over be over here on the side, like that. You have your parking there. Because there's nothing, there's no existing vegetation in your site. It would be very bad if you block your building with your parking, and then your plaza will be here. If your main entrance is here, or vice versa, if your entrance is here, have the plaza over here. But the main thing that you should remember for your design is to have your not to have your parking space over here block your uh, church, because the church is not just like a house, it's not just an apartment, it's not just an office building, but it's like a religious building. And whether you're Catholic or not, religious buildings have should be elevated, because you're kind of like, if the effect of putting a parking space here, here, or here, or covering your building any kind, sort of like degrades the importance of the building. So I will end with that. It's 3:11. Expect a quiz to appear on Canvas. Answer the quiz. And then, oh yeah, we need to talk about our assignment, or like a pre-made assignment. It's 3:11. I'll probably just write it up onto Canvas. Anyway, it'll be a simple, like a fill in the blank table type of assignment. We'll talk about it. Maybe right now, if you guys have the energy. I'll stop recording here and we can talk about the, sir, what may na-inform sa group sa FB. Sorry, I just read that now. Okay, please use your mics later on. You can join the FB group. Inform sa groups FB. I will forward it to you. Okay, some people I think saw it. Okay, let me just put that here. We did, na, sir. Okay, thank you. Thank you to whoever linked them. Okay, good. So I will stop recording here, because I don't want the video to go too long and recording. I'll make a separate recording for the discussion on